The gods of our land, I summon you today. Arise. Go to Akoko Edo village. Flog all the villagers. They will all suffer till they honor me with their sacrifice.
When a man takes over power he never deserved, evil, cruelty, and injustice become inevitable. In the ancient hills of Akoko Edo, where red earth stretched far and wide, meeting whispering forests that seem alive with secrets, and where the wind carried the soft voice of ancestors long gone, there lived a man whose name brought both comforts and deep respect, Baba Adisa. People did not just know him, they believed in him. To the villagers, he was more than a man. He was a guide, a protector, a sacred bridge between the world they could see and the one they could not. He was the chief prince, the eyes of the gods. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, Baba Adisa would step out quietly, his white cloth wrapped neatly around his body, his staff in hand. He would walk to the shrine, his footsteps slow but steady, as if he carried the weight of the entire village on his shoulder. And perhaps he did. Villagers came from far and near, some limping, some carried, some weeping. Mothers brought sick children, burning with fever. Farmers came with fear in their hearts. When their crops began to fail, young men came with restless spirits, claiming they were being chased in their dreams. Baba Adisa listened to them all. He never rushed. He never turned anyone away. With calm eyes and a steady voice, he would speak to the gods, offer sacrifice, mix herbs, and perform sacred rites. And somehow, things always change. The sick began to heal. The troubled found peace. The land himself seemed to breathe easier. Under his watch, yam grew large and heavy beneath the soil. Palm trees stood tall and generous. Rivers flowed gently, never angry, never dry. At dusk, laughter filled the air as families gathered, sharing food and stories. Peace lived in that land, but even in a place touched by blessing, darkness can grow quietly. It does not shout, it does not announce himself. It hides, and sometimes it grows in the very house of the one chosen by the gods. Adisa, Baba Adisa's only son, was that hidden darkness. From the outside, no one would suspect him. He moved gently, spoke politely, and carried himself like a well-trained son. When elders passed, he bowed low. When women greeted him, he smiled respectfully. In the presence of his father, he acted obedient and calm. Many even praised him. Baba Adisa is blessed, they will say. His son will continue his good work. But they did not know. They could not see what lived inside him. Where Baba Adisa was patient, Adisa was easily angered. Where the father gave freely, the son wanted more. Where the father feared the gods, the son feared nothing. By the day, he played his role perfectly. But by night, his shadow changed. When darkness covered the village and the last cooking fire died down, Adisa would sleep quietly out of his father's compound. His footsteps were careful, his eyes alert. He moved like someone who had done this many times before. Deep in the forest, where the trees stood thick and the moonlight barely touched the ground, he would meet his friends, men like him, men who laughed too loudly in the dark, men whose hearts were not clean. They would sit together, sharing stolen items, goats tied with rope, bags of yam, even money taken from frightening villagers. Their laughter was low and sharp. I spoke in my father's name today, Adisa would say proudly, leaning back with a smirk. They came to me for help, said their child was sick. And what did you do? One of his friends would ask. I told them the gods demanded sacrifice. 2 goats, 10 tubers of yam. The group would burst into laughter. And they agreed. Another will ask. Adisa's smile will grow wider, colder. They always agreed, he said. When you speak with the voice of fear, people listened. Sometimes he will even dress like his father, copying his tone, his gesture, even the way he closed his eyes when speaking to the gods. And the villagers believed him because they trusted Baba Adisa. Again and again, Baba Adisa noticed small things going wrong. Offerings that were never brought to the shrine. Complaints whispered by villagers who felt uneasy but could not explain why. And slowly, he began to suspect. One evening, he called his son. "My son," he said softly, his voice filled with both authority and sadness. "There is a path you are walking that leads to destruction." Adisa stood quietly, pretending to listen. "The gods are patient," Baba Adisa continued, "but they are not blind. A man who deceives his people does not only harm them, he destroys himself." Adisa lowered his head. "Yes, father," he replied calmly. But inside, he felt nothing. No fear, no guilt. Only irritation, only hunger. More warnings came, more advice. But each fell on a heart that had already closed its doors. And so, the distance between father and son grew, not in space, but in spirit. One night, when the village was silent and even the insect seemed to whisper instead of sing, Adisa sat alone before the sacred shrine. The fire burned low, its flickering light dancing across his face, revealing something dark in his eyes, something dangerous. He stared at the carved symbols of the gods, and slowly he spoke. "I am tired of waiting." The word came out cold, heavy, like a decision already made. "For how long will I bow when I should be the one they bow to?" His jaw tightened, his finger clenched. "I am ready." The fire cracked softly, as if responding. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that did not sound like a prayer. "I pray my father join the ancestors soon, so I can take my place." For a moment, everything became still. The winds that once moved freely through the trees suddenly stopped. The night grew thick, uncomfortable, as if the unseen world himself had heard him. But Adisa only smiled. Years passed like drifting smoke. Slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed. The seasons came and went. Rain fell and stopped. Children grew into adults. New stories were told in the village square, while old ones faded into memories. And Baba Adisa, he grew older. His one strong step became slower. His back bent slightly with age. His voice, though still calm, carried a tired weight. The long years of serving the people and speaking for the gods had begun to show on his body. But his spirit, still strong, still faithful, even in the old age, he continued his duties. He still rose before dawn. He still went to the shrine. He still listened to every villager who came to him. But those who looked closer could see it. Time was catching up, and Adisa saw it too. Every day, every moment, waiting, watching, counting. Then the inevitable came. One quiet morning, the village woke to see a silence that felt wrong. No early footstep, no sound of Baba Adisa's staff tapping gently on the earth. No soft prayers rising from the shrine. Only stiffness, heavy stiffness. Word spread quickly. Baba Adisa was gone. He had joined the ancestors. The entire village fell into mourning. Women wailed loudly, their cries echoing across the hills. Some beat their chests, calling his name again and again, as if he could hear them. Others sat on the ground, tears flowing freely down their faces. Men gathered in silence, their head bowed. Even the strongest among them could not hide their grief. The drums began to speak, slow, deep, heavy. Each beat carried sorrow into the air. telling the land that a great man had fallen. Children were pulled close to their mothers. Fire burned slowly in compounds. Laughter disappeared. Even the wind seemed to move carefully, respectfully, because a pillar of the village had fallen. And Adisa, he played his part perfectly. No one could question him. The moment the news broke, he threw himself to the ground. He rolled in the dust. He cried loudly, louder than anyone else. His voice shook. His body trembled. He tore his clothes with his own hands, scattering the pieces around him. Father, why have you left me? He cried, his voice filled with pain. Who will guide me now? Who will guide this village? He beat his chest again and again, as if his heart was truly breaking. The villagers rushed to him, trying to comfort him. Take heart, my son. The elder said gently, your father lived a good life. Women wiped their tears as they looked at him. What a devoted son, they whispered. See how much he loved his father. Some even cried more because of him, because his sorrow looked real, too real. But sorrow can wear a mask, and Adisa wore it well. The burial lasted for days. Sacrifices were made. Songs of farewell were sung. Stories of Baba Adisa's greatness were told again and again. How he healed the sick, how he protected the land, how he never turned anyone away. His body was laid to rest with honor, with dignity, with deep respect. And through it all, Adisa never broke character, not once, but behind the closed doors, when no one was watching, when the cries had faded, and the night grew quiet. Adisa stood alone before a small mirror. He looked at himself, long, carefully, and then he smiled. Not a sad smile, not a grieving smile, but a slow, satisfied smile. At last, the waiting was over. The throne was his. Days later, after all the burial rites were completed and the period of mourning began to settle, the elders of the village gathered. It was time for the next chief prince to rise, time for the village to have the new guardian, time for the gods to have a new voice. Adisa was called forward, dressed in white, his face calm, his head slightly bowed, pretending humility. The sacred shrine stood before him, quiet and powerful. The hair around it felt heavy, as if it carried the presence of something unseen. The oldest elder stepped forward slowly. In his hands was the staff of authority, a staff that had been carried by Baba Adisa for many years. A staff that symbolized power, responsibility, and truth. From these days, the elder said, his voice firm but slow, you will stand where your father stood. The staff was placed into Adisa's hand. Then came the sacred beads. Carefully, they were placed around his neck. The moment they touched his skin, a strange silence fell over the shrine. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Even the wind held his breath. Adisa lifted his head slowly. His eyes moved around the people standing before him. The elders, the villagers, all looking at him with hope, with trust, with belief. He raised the staff slightly, and for a moment, he felt it. Power, real power. He was no longer just the son, he was now the chief prince. The eyes of the gods, the voice of the unseen, the one the village will follow, the one they will fear, the one they will trust. But as he stood there, something felt wrong. The shrine was quiet, too empty, too still. The presence that once filled the air during his father's time was gone. Adisa waited. Maybe a sign, a whisper, a feeling, anything, but nothing came. The gods were silent, completely silent. And deep within that silence, something else shifted. Something unseen, something patient, something that had been waiting, just like him. Only this time, It was not waiting for power. It was waiting for him. At first, nothing changed. The day moved as they always had. The sun rose gently over the hills. Farmers went to their land. Women swept their compound and prepared meals. Children ran barefoot, laughing and chasing one another through narrow paths. Life continued. Adisa performed the rituals just as his father had done. He woke early, dressed in white, and walked to the shrine. With slow, careful steps, he spoke in a deep, controlling voice. He used the right words. He made the right moves. To anyone watching, he looked perfect. He walked with pride, his shoulders straight, his chin shifted slightly. When villagers greeted him, he nodded with quiet authority. When they came with problems, he listened with a serious face, just like his father used to. And the villagers trusted him. How could they not? He was Baba Adisa's son, the one chosen to continue the sacred duty. The gods are still with us, they will say. We are safe. But what they did not understand was that greed is never satisfied. It does not rest. It does not stop. The more he gets, the more he wants. At first, Adisa was careful. Only took small things. A little extra yam here, a small offering there. Nothing too noticeable. Nothing that would raise questions. But slowly, that was not enough. The taste of power had entered his blood, and it was growing. One night, under a full moon that shone brightly in the sky, round and watchful, like an eye that saw everything, Adisa stepped out of his compound. The village was asleep. Fires had gone out. Doors were shut. Only the sound of distant insects filled the air. Adisa walked alone. His footsteps were steady. His face was hard. He was not going to the shrine. No, he was going somewhere else. Somewhere forbidden. The village cemetery. A place people avoided. A place where the air always feels heavier than normal. Where silence were never truly silent. Where it was believed that spirit lingered, watching, waiting. No true priest entered that place without a serious reason, without permission, without respect. But Adisa, he had none of that. He walked boldly between the graves, his staff hitting the ground with a dull sound. The wind moved through the trees in a strange way, almost like whispers followed him. Still, he did not stop. He stood in the center of the cemetery, surrounded by the resting place of the dead. Then slowly he raised his staff. His leaf began to move. He started to chant, not prayers, not pure words, but incantations. Words he had secretly learned by watching his father. Words he was never meant to use like this. Words twisted by his own desires. The moment the word left his mouth, the air changed. It grew cold, very cold. A strange chill ran across the ground, moving like something alive. The leaves stopped moving. The night seemed to hold his breath. Then the ground trembled slightly, just a little, but enough. And then they came. At first, it was just shadows, moving shape that did not belong to anybody. Then faint whispers, voice that had no clear source. The restless dead. They gathered slowly around him, like smoke rising from the earth. Some shapes looked tall, others bent. Some moved quietly, others dragged like something heavy held them down. It was not a sight for the living, but Adisa did not fear. He did not bow. He did not show respect. Instead, he commanded, "Go into the village," he said, his voice sharp and filled with arrogance. The shadow seemed to pause, as if surprised. "Punish them," he continued, tightening his grip on the staff. "Flog them. Let them feel the anger of the gods." The wind rose suddenly. The shadows twisted, and then they disappeared. At night, something terrible happened. Screams broke the silence of the village, loud, sudden, full of fear. Invisible wipes cut through the air. Men cried out as pain stroked their back without warning. Women screamed and fell to the ground. Children ran. confused and terrified, clinging tightly to their mothers. No one could see anything. No one could fight back. There was no attackers, no faces, no bodies, only pain, only fear. Doors flew open. People ran outside, calling for help. Some fell to their knees, begging for mercy from the gods. The entire village was thrown into chaos. And in the middle of it all, Adisa slept, or at least he pretended to. At dawn, the village was no longer the same. The fear hung in the air like a thick smoke. People moved quickly, whispering, their eyes wide with confusion and terror. Some had marks on their bodies. Others were too shaken to speak properly. They did not wait. They ran straight to the shrine. Priest Adisa, they cried, their voice desperate. Save us, the gods are angry. Adisa stepped out slowly, calm, quiet, as if he already knew. He looked at them, his face serious, his eyes slightly narrowed. Then he lowered his head, pretending to carry a heavy burden. Yes, he said slowly, I have seen it. The villagers leaned closer, holding onto every word. You have neglected the gods, he continued. You have forgotten your duties, and now they are angry. Panic spread across their faces. What must we do? They begged. Tell us, we will do anything. For a brief moment, Adisa's eyes changed. A small gleam, quick, sharp, but it was there. Bring sacrifice, he said firmly. Cows, goats, yam, palm wine, kola nut. He paused. Only then will the gods be appeased. No one questioned him. No one doubted him. They obeyed immediately. That same day, offering began to arrive at the shrine. Animals were tied. Food was piled high. Drinks were poured out. And Adisa watched it all, satisfied. But inside him, something else was growing. Something dark than greed. Because now, he has tasted something even stronger than power. Control. From that day forward, fear ruled the village. It became part of their lives. Whenever Adisa desired wealth, whenever hunger touched his stomach, whenever greed whispered softly into his ears, he would return to the cemetery, and each time he went, the night grew colder, the shadows gathered faster, the voice became clearer, stronger, and each time the suffering in the village increased. People stopped laughing, children stopped playing freely, even the elders began to look worried because something was wrong, very wrong. And deep within the unseen world, the thing that had answered Adisa that first night was no longer just listening, it was watching him closely, leaning him, waiting for the moment he would no longer be the one giving order. At first, no one questioned him. How could they? He was the son of Baba Adisa, the man they had trusted for many years, the man who had brought peace to their land. So even when things began to feel wrong, they kept quiet. They endure, they obey, they hope. But fear, when it stayed too long, began to change people. It stopped being just fear. It becomes something else, something sharper, something that asks questions. Slowly, quietly, the villagers began to whisper among themselves. Not in the open, not in the daytime, but in corners, behind closed doors, in low voices at night. Why do the gods punish us so often? One woman asked, her voice trembling. An old man shook his head slowly. In the days of Baba Adisa, this did not happen. Another added, even when we made mistake, the gods warned us gently. Not like this, with pain every night. A young farmer spoke with worry in his eyes. Why does he always ask for more? More goats, more yam, more sacrifice. And still another whispered, the attack do not stop. Silence will follow. Heavy silence, because no one wanted to say it out loud. But the thought was there, growing, spreading. Something was wrong, very wrong. The harmony of the land had begun to crack. The laughter that once filled the evening had faded. Children no longer play freely at night. Doors were locked earlier. Fire burnt longer, not for warmth, but for comfort. Even the elders began to watch closely, their eyes filled with quiet concern. And then came the night that would change everything. The moon was full again, bright, unblinking, like an eye watching from above. Adisa stepped out once more, just like he had done many times before. His movements were confident, his steps were steady. There was no doubt in him. Why would there be? Everything had been working. Every time he called, they came. Every time he commanded, they obeyed. Every time he wanted, he got. So that night felt no different. Or so he thought. He walked towards the cemetery, the cold night air brushing against his skin. The trees stood tall and silent, their shadows stretched long across the ground. The cemetery waited, still, quiet, heavy. Adisa stepped into it without hesitation. He stood among the graves, raised his staff, closed his eyes briefly, and began to chant. The same word, the same dark incantations, the same stolen power. The air changed just like before, cold, unnatural. The ground trembled beneath his feet. Stronger this time, more noticeable. But Adisa did not stop. He continued, confident, certain, and then they came. The shadows rose, the shape formed, but something was different, very different. They did not gather at a distance. They did not move like servants. They came closer. The wind rose suddenly, violently. It rushed through the trees, bending branches, carrying a sound that felt almost like anger. The ground shook harder than before. Adisa opened his eyes, and for the first time, he hesitated. The shadows were no longer scattered. They surrounded him, slowly, completely, not as servants, but as judges. Adisa frowned, gripping his staff tighter. I command you, he shouted, raising his voice above the wind. Go and flog the villagers. Nothing happened. No response. Only silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then a voice spoke. Deep. Cold. Unforgiving. You dare command us. Adisa heart skipped. He looked around quickly. The shadows shifted. Another voice followed. You who lie in the name of the gods. Another. You who steal from your own people. And another. You who wish death upon your father. The word struck harder than any weapon. Adisa staggered back. His grip on the staff loosed. His breath changed. For the first time, fear entered his heart. Not the fear he created in others, but real fear. Deep fear. The kind that shakes the soul. I am the chief priest, he stammered, his voice no longer strong. I spoke for the gods. The wind roared louder. The shadows moved closer. You are nothing. The spirit roared together. The sun shook the air, shook the ground, shook him. Adisa turned, looking for a way out, but there was none. They were everywhere, watching, waiting, and then they struck. Not with hands, not with weapons, but with the same force he had used against others. Invisible wipes tore through the air. The first struck him. He screamed, loud, sharp. Pain exploded across his body. Another strike followed, then another, then many at once. He fell to the ground, rolling, crying, begging. No, please stop, he shouted, his voice breaking. I will change. I will stop. Please. But the voices did not soften. The shadows did not retreat. The dead do not forget, and they do not forgive wickedness. Every lie, every stolen sacrifice, every cry of the villagers, every dark wish in his heart came back to him, stronger. He screamed until his voice grew weak. He begged until his words lost meaning. He cried until there were no more tears left. And still the punishment continued. haunting silence. By morning, the cemetery was quiet again. The wind moved gently. The shadows were gone. And Adisa's lifeless body laid on the ground, broken, still, alone. The staff rested beside him, useless, cold. When the villagers found him, they did not scream, they did not run. They stood there, looking, understanding. The fear that once filled their hearts slowly began to fade. No song were sung, no tears were shed, because deep inside they knew. They understood what had happened and why. From that day forward, everything began to change. The attacks stopped. No more scream at night. No more invisible pain. The village slept peacefully again. The air felt lighter. The land began to heal. Laughter slowly returned. Children played again. Farmers worked without fear. And the elders spoke quietly among themselves, sharing a truth that will never be forgotten. A truth that will be told from one generation to another. Power taken without honor destroys the one who owns it. In Akoko Edo, the gods had spoken, not with gentle warnings, but with final judgment. Thanks guys for watching this video. Please subscribe to this channel to watch more of our amazing stories. Like, share and drop your comment below.